The Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is not the law. The Green New Deal hasn't been passed in the House and Senate and signed by the president. The Green New Deal isn't policy anywhere. And yet Republicans more and more are blaming the Green New Deal for the power failure in Texas that we saw over the last week to 10 days. How is this possible? This would be like blaming Medicare for all for a problem when Medicare for all isn't the law in the United States. Here is an example. Cruz, a Republican Texas Senator Ted Cruz, who recently fled over the U.S.-Mexico border with his family to Mexico when the power went out at his house in Texas, only to come back 20 hours later after his escape attempt blew up in his face. He was on Sean Hannity's Fox News program last night saying that what is to blame for the power outages in Texas is the Green New Deal. Take a look.
We just came off of a very difficult week where the grid failed 4 million Texans. And so we need to have a serious examination about why that was, why the grid came short. But one of the major elements of that is actually the policy that Schumer is pushing for the whole country, which is the Green New Deal. You look at Texas right now, about 25% of our electricity capacity is wind. And yet, in the middle of this storm, that capacity dropped all the way down to 2%. You want to talk about reliability. The reality was in the cold, the wind turbines froze and the power generation wasn't there.
Ted Cruz manages to squeeze about 6 lies into that short 40-second segment that I played for you. It's a great illustration of the problem we're talking about. So let's talk through it. First of all, what Texas did over the last 10, 15 years with their power grid, it's nothing like what the Green New Deal would do. Ted Cruz wants you to believe that Texas went all in on green energy and now has power failures. And it's a preview of what happens to the whole country if the whole country goes in the direction of green energy. Texas did something that's the opposite of the Green New Deal. Texas isolated their power grid from the rest of the country to avoid so-called federal government meddling and interference in their energy market. Former Governor Rick Perry talked about it last week. We've heard from a number of different people bragging about we are an independent grid. The Green New Deal doesn't call for that. And so what happened was that when the grid was stressed, and we'll talk about why it was stressed, they couldn't get power from anywhere else. It has nothing to do with what is in the Green New Deal. And of course, the Green New Deal hasn't passed. Second, Ted says wind energy is 25% of power generation capacity in Texas. This is in theory accurate. Texas can, in theory, get up to 24.8% of power from wind, but that's seasonal. In the winter, it's only a fraction of that. Last week, when the power outages happened, 25% of actual electricity was not coming from wind power. But more importantly, third, when Ted says that energy generation capacity from wind plummeted during the storm, that's true, but it also plummeted even more for natural gas, coal, and nuclear, on which Texas is significantly more reliant. And the reason is not because of wind power versus nuclear versus coal or gas. It's because Texas chose not to winterize any of their power generation. So they've got an isolated grid that can't pull from any other part of the country, and they opt not to winterize. As I've said a dozen times in the last week, back in 2011, Texas had similar outages. A report was compiled explaining how you prevent this in the future, and they just didn't do it. And yes, some wind farms froze because they weren't winterized, but the bigger problem was frozen instruments at coal, natural gas, and nuclear power plants, which are not winterized. Everything Ted Cruz is saying is a lie. Now, you might see this and write it off and say, David, how can the Green New Deal be to blame for anything? It hasn't been passed. It hasn't been made law. No one would fall for this. And yet they do. Just look at Twitter. Look at Reddit. Look at the, quote, debates happening on cable news right now. This stuff works on lots of Republicans. When Obamacare was being debated before it passed, there were Republicans blaming Obamacare for not being able to get medical procedures. It wasn't the law yet. Protesters doing things last summer were being blamed on this is Biden's America. Trump was president. Millions of them fell for it. And this is sort of part of how they blamed Antifa for the January 6th insurrection incited by Trump, carried out by Trumpists. Antifa had nothing to do with it. So unless time travel is a factor that I somehow don't understand and that we've not yet been able to explain, and what we're talking about is time moves in a different way than we conceive of it, there is no possible way that the Green New Deal is responsible, but it doesn't matter to them. They are either falling for it or knowingly accepting something that's untrue in order to try to point fingers elsewhere. It's disgusting, but it represents a barrier in actually getting things done, properly winterizing these electrical grids and continuing to move to green energy, which in many ways is actually more robust in its ability to resist changes in climate and weather. I don't know what the future is of this talking point, but my instinct is that it's going to be around for a while. And if and when Joe Biden actually gets around to moving forward on his Green New Deal green infrastructure plan, which takes elements from the Green New Deal, I would assume that many of these Republicans are going to fight it by saying Green New Deal type stuff is responsible for what happened in Texas in 2021. It'll be untrue, of course, but it's clearly a talking point they're going to repeat and repeat and repeat. Let me know what you think. I'm on Twitter at @Pakman. I want to take a second to tell you about one of our sponsors, S&H Masks. S&H Masks has everything you need when it comes to face masks and other protective gear for COVID-19, and they're giving my audience 20% off. S&H Masks is the company that I've personally been going to for face masks. I love and trust the products they sell, and that's actually why I reached out to them about being a sponsor. I've tried tons of different face masks this year, like many of you, and I still have not found a mask that is more comfortable or easier to breathe in than the washable cotton masks that they sell. It's made of a silky, lightweight cloth that feels great on the skin, has a convenient adjustable strap. They also have disposable cloth masks, which are really comfortable, as well as all of the other gear like face shields, alcohol wipes, no-touch infrared thermometers. And all of their prices are very reasonable. I also love S&H Masks because they've donated over 60,000 masks to healthcare institutions. They're an excellent company. Shipping is just $5 and shipping is free on orders over $150. You can get there by going to davidpakman.com/mask. The link is under this video, and you can save 20% on everything in their store when you use the coupon code DAVID.